I guess we'll get started. Today is Tuesday, April 12th, 2016. This is the regular monthly meeting of the Austin City Planning Commission. We have a couple items on the agenda tonight. Before we get to that, I'll ask if the commissioners have had a chance to look at the minutes from our meeting of last month, Tuesday, March 15th. And if there are any changes, corrections, additions? Hearing none, I will ask for a motion.
Move that they be approved as submitted.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Bremner.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Lutz. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, I guess we'll start then with you, Holly.
Yes, I have a couple of things on the agenda. Was planning to introduce our new Planning Commission member. He had intended to be here tonight, so I'm not sure why he's not here, but if he comes, we'll move that to the end of the agenda. Otherwise, we need to appoint a new chairperson and vice chairperson for 2016. Steve Keim has been the chairperson for 2015 and into the new year, and Laura Helly has been the vice chairperson for 2015 and into the new year, and both have agreed to be nominated this year if the Planning Commission so desires. So if there are any nominations.
I move that we nominate Steve Keim as chairperson and Laura Helly as vice chairperson.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we have a new chairperson and vice chairperson who are actually,
Not new.
yeah, continuing from last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
It's been a tough job so far.
We appreciate your volunteering very much. Thank you. The next, so I'll hand it back to Mr. Keim, our chair, and
Okay.
for the next public hearing.
Okay, the item that we have on the agenda is an open public hearing. The petitioner has a 5-acre homestead with 5 existing accessory structures. The petitioner wishes to remove an 8x10 shed and replace it with a 12x16 shed. The parcel is unique in the city of Austin in that it has 217,800 square feet, which is approximately 36 times larger than the minimum residential lot of 6,000 square feet. The requested variance is pursuant to Austin City Code Section 11.01, Subdivision 1, allowing a maximum of 2 accessory structures and a coverage of 1,584 feet.
Well, our description there kind of covers the whole thing. So this is a petition brought by Clarice Seavey. She's not here tonight, but her son-in-law and daughter are here on her behalf. If you have any additional questions that you might want to ask, I've put up an aerial of the property showing there are the structures on the property. There's a house, 2 garages, and 3 sheds, 1 to be removed, and then the X is in the area where the proposed garden shed would go. The square footage of the existing structures is 3,488 square feet, which exceeds our allowed square footage of 1,587. The proposed square footage would increase the amount to 3,600 square feet. So it would add on to what's existing, even though one of the structures would be removed. The lot coverage of the existing structures is about 3% of the lot. The allowed in the city is 40%, which is quite, quite a lot more than what they currently have covering their lot. And the reason for that is that this is about 5 acres. The average city lot, or the minimum allowed lot under our ordinance, is about 1/7 of an acre. So the 40% coverage and the square footage that we have in our ordinance are geared more towards the smaller lots. The Number of accessory structures also does exceed the ordinance limit by 3 structures. But again, the coverage is only 3% versus what's allowed at 40%, just based on the size of the structures and the size of the parcel. If the planning commission, this would be a recommendation to the council. If the planning commission would consider recommending approval of the variance, it should consider that the variance is in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the zoning code, and this is in an R1 residential district. The variance would be consistent with the comprehensive plan, which is consistent with the residential in the area. The applicant would have to establish that there are practical difficulties, which would be that the landowner, the issue is due to circumstances unique to the property that are not created by the landowner, that the variance would not permit a use that's generally not allowed in the zoning district where the affected area land is located, and that it would not alter the essential character of the surrounding area. And you can see it on the other aerial that was included in the packet, but the surrounding property is agricultural to the north and the east and the south. To the west is a strip of industrial property. And just to the south of the agricultural property is, I believe it was formerly Carney's Junkyard. So that's just to the south. There really aren't any other residences near this property. It was carved out like it is. The pink that you see around it is the city limits. And it was part of the Lansing annexation, so that homestead was carved out for purposes of annexing into the city to get sewer and water.
Okay.
Well, just from the pictures, the graphics, it definitely looks more, it has the more rural look, I will say, than your typical city, which, stands true with the size of the parcel. So I think that's a consideration as we look at what that can hold, what's options are for size.
It's like the city code really doesn't have any place with this large a piece of land.
No, we really don't have anything that addresses, the recent annexations we have annexed some pretty large parcels. And there definitely have been issues with people wanting to use land in a particular way that just didn't really work, that maybe we could look at ongoing to maybe address or create a, additional ordinance that would address uses of larger parcels that would not typically be unduly affected by maybe additional structures or cause nuisance to their neighbors, or various other uses that may be more amenable to a larger parcel than a small parcel.
Can we consider in terms of the variance that we're only talking about 3% coverage versus the allowable 40%?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, and I also have a technical question. So the statutory requirement, it's 1, 2, and 3, and then underneath 3 there are 3 bullet points. Is that a 3 bullet point? You have to meet all 3 of these bullet points? Craig's saying yes. Okay. So I feel like we're pretty solid on 2 of the 3. But on a typical size lot, we would not be saying yes to more structures and more square footage.
Well, and I'm kind of wondering, what are the practical difficulties in complying with this provision? What's the reason for moving the shed, and is that something that we can ask the?
Sure.
State your name and address for the record, please.
Kyle Hendrickson, 2708 11th Street Northeast. I think the answer, I'm not sure who asked the question,
I
but
did.
You did. The part of the story that's not told is that the shed is so that my mother-in-law can continue to garden. If you look at the overhead, right here, right by where the garden, or by where we want to place the shed is her flower garden and also her vegetable garden. As she's getting up there in age, it's arduous for her to trek back and forth over to this other shed where she keeps her gardening materials. Also, it should be noted that with this size of a land, we have a very small basement because this is out in the country. With this size of land, we have 2 John Deere tractors with the associated implements. We also have 10 acres of untillable, which is separated by the field to the east, that we have a Polaris razor to get back and forth so we can make sure that there's not anything going on back there since we're so close to the park. So there are other requirements that also eat up the space. 2 of the other sheds were placed to replace the grain bins that were damaged by the tornado. So those are on the foundations of those grain bins, and which were smaller than the grain bins that we previously had storage in. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it did, thank you.
Are there any other questions for the commissioners?
A question for Mr. Byam. There seem to be 2 different standards here that aren't necessarily in alignment with each other. The 40% coverage rule as opposed to the 1,584 square foot rule aggregate based on the property being more than an acre. So does that mean as a commission we're free to choose whichever standard we want to apply in this case?
I think that with all of our zoning standards, the first thought that one should have is why do we have these rules? And you're right, there are 2 rules that govern accessory structures. One is the size that they can be, the collective size that they can be, and another one is just lot coverage, which doesn't necessarily have to be accessory structures. It includes the main structure. It includes a lot of things. But both of those rules really are focused on a density question. In neighborhoods, when you lose green space and you lose the ability to see the sky and you get overly built, it can have negative impacts on surrounding land values and uses and just the feel of having an organized community. And so that's why when you get a piece of property like this, the natural question is, how does a 40% rule even come into play on a property this size, and are we being unreasonable by making them stop at 3%? Because the goals and intentions of those regulations don't really come into play here. So the rules can come into play at different times. We've always had a lot coverage rule. The size of the accessory structure and number of accessory structures came into play when we had some people on smaller properties in more developed neighborhoods who were sort of abusing the process, and they were building bigger and bigger and bigger garages, and the sense was that there was a limit to what was appropriate in a urban setting. Then that rule may not apply here in a very rural setting. The needs are different. The experience of neighbors of that is different. So.
Well, I'm glad that you said that, because I was looking at number 3 and looking at the keywords of practical difficulties, and quite honestly, I think that you can look at practical difficulties in a totally different way when you're looking at density. A practical difficulty might be totally different for somebody who's living with neighbors like right on their lot line versus something out here. So I'm willing to give some leeway to some latitude towards what's considered a practical difficulty, because if I were your mother's age, that would be a practical difficult for me. But if I was in a lot that was a city size, that was extremely small, and I didn't want to walk, 50 feet or something, that may be a totally different argument that I would make in terms of what is a practical difficulty. So I really think that in terms of common sense, when we're looking at removing a shed and just moving it closer, I could see that as a practical difficulty on this size of a lot, and I don't think that it's unreasonable to ask for this type of a variance when we're looking at this type of unique situation.
I think that the landowners have identified a series of things that you just mentioned that are defensible as practical difficulties. And I think it's because you look at number 3, I think there's 2 components of that, but they go hand in hand, especially in a case like this. Practical difficulties can be based upon the reasonable nature that the landowner wants to put the land. And an urban setting with a small lot, it may not be reasonable
Right.
to allow somebody to put it to the same use. On the other hand, a lot size like this likely has different maintenance needs, different equipment needs, different storage needs that a landowner would reasonably consider to be natural and normal if you owned this size of a lot.
Right.
And the inability to do that because you're hitting a 3% max becomes a practical difficulty to do what is objectively reasonable with your land.
Right.
And then it comes back to us to say, but is this going to violate the reason and the purpose, the public policy, the ideas behind these rules? And that's your decision is this lot coverage at the level they're proposing starting to get into that area where it's violating the reasons why we have these rules? Or is this piece of property so unique that violating the rules just on this property still keeps the spirit of the ordinance fully intact, and you feel like you can recommend approval?
Yeah,
So
thank you.
so let's fast forward, if this variance was granted, and then in 50 years, that property is subdivided into 10 lots, the variance doesn't go with it. Someone's not going to be able to have a 1/6 of that property with 6 sheds on it because we said they could in this case. Is that correct?
Right, if this property starts to become subdivided, if you could keep a parcel with all of the structures on it and only subdivide things that aren't occupied by any part of this,
That would be hard to
it's in theory that you could do that, but I would suggest it's very difficult to do that.
I would say too, I would just add to that, that we do have subdivision requirements so that that subdivision would go through a review process. And if there were structures that were required to be removed, then that would be part of that process.
Well, and I feel comfortable also that they're removing that shed and then replacing it. It's not like they're just starting to add sheds all over the place, which even at that lot coverage, I don't see as a problem. But, yeah, I agree with you, Mr. Byram. I think that common sense needs to prevail when we're looking at this, and that, you know, I mean, unless you have other questions or whatever, I'd be willing to make a motion.
Are there any other questions?
Okay.
We'll open it up to a motion.
I will go ahead and make a motion to approve the variance as a recommendation to the city council. And I would say that I would like to include the staff recommendations, the location of the structure, the permanence of the structure, the purpose of setbacks, coverage, and accessory structure limits, health and safety, air and open, all the kind of stuff are taken into consideration. I do believe that we've probably met our burden in terms of what the variance is, what the purpose is for, and that I do not think that it is unreasonable when looking at the lot coverage and density in this specific situation. So I recommend approval.
Okay, we have a
Second.
recommendation to approve by Commissioner Spienhower.
Second.
We have a second from Commissioner Bremner. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
We just have one more item. We'll
Oh,
introduce
yes.
our new member.
That guy sitting at the end over there.
So I would just introduce Greg Seams. He's Vision 2020 Director. He's a new addition to our Planning Commission. Congratulations.
Welcome.
Condolences.
Thank you for joining
Yeah,
us.
I apologize for my tardiness, but yeah, I'm excited to be part of the commission and look forward to participating in the future.
Look forward to working with you too, Greg. Thank you.
You know, we elected the chair and vice chair for the year, but you weren't here to speak up and say that you wanted to take either of those roles.
So you're saying I was delegated that responsibility?
No, I'm just, just wanted to give you the opportunity to
If you
jump
wanted to nominate
in.
yourself.
We already voted. It's probably a dead
You're,
issue.
for next
you're
year.
good this year.
Yeah. Okay, anything else?
Nothing else?
Okay, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
So moved.
Motion
Second.
to adjourn by Commissioner Spienhower, second by Commissioner Bremner. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much.
That's got to be almost a
I like these.